Welcome to Beyond the Walls podcast. I'm your host, Kylie, and I am so excited to be able to have this conversation with you to help teach you tools, ideas, support on how to go beyond your walls too. Are you tired of feeling stuck and trapped and like a victim in your own life? Maybe you need to find a new way to look at it. Look at your situation from a different angle. Maybe we need to learn and take a look to see how we can re-choose or recreate a life that is going to bring you joy and purpose and feel free and exciting. So let's get started on today's message. Okay, I want you to think for a minute about the one person you would want to have around you 24/7. That person might be, your first thought might be like your children or a spouse or a family member. I think like me, I immediately went to those people and then I was kind of like, wow, like all the time, 24/7, like I never get a break. I mean, it's mostly good, but it's not always, right? And then I was like, wait, what about like my best friend? Those people that I love spending time with, that person that always, they're just there for the high highs. They're also there for the low lows, but we don't have any of the tension or the drama that comes along with marriage or with your kids or parenting or family members, right? Like they might still cause us irritation and frustrations, but just not in the same way, right? And if you think about it, like a best friend, why are they your best friend? Right? You love spending time with them. Probably because it's a supportive relationship. They're your cheerleader. They cheer you on. They encourage you to get back up and try again, right? If you made a mistake, they're not there to beat you down and to rub your nose in it or to point out your flaws. They are there to speak life back into you, right? Or to just listen. They don't need to fix the problem for you. They're not holding it against you. Like it's a safe, supportive, positive, building up relationship, right? But there is a person in your life that you cannot get away with. You cannot get away from. You cannot avoid being with the rest of your life. And that is yourself. And today I want to talk about the value, the importance, and the control that you actually have in choosing what kind of friend you are to yourself. What kind of cheerleader are you going to be for yourself? And I think a lot of the work that I do here at Beyond the Walls is being able to separate that, the victimhood and this feeling to naturally want to blame our circumstances, blame the environment, blame others outside of us that really we have no control over. But it's so easy to just point our fingers at them and say, there's nothing I can do about it. And so today, let's dig in and talk about what you do have a control over, what you do have a say about, okay? So one thing, let's just take a minute and learn this thought. I think there's been a lot of talk about it, so I doubt that it's a new thought to you, but negative bias. We are wired, built, designed to look for problems, to sort of be pessimistic. Like there's this balance of like, are we being realistic? Are we optimistic? Are we pessimistic? And somewhere in the middle, right? But finding problems is good. Like it keeps us safe, doesn't it? It's kind of like those senses that we have, like we have those gut feelings of it keeps us from going down into dark alleys at night and putting ourselves in dangerous situations, or to knowing to not touch the hot stove, to having some caution, right? Like having pain and problem awareness keeps us alive and it keeps us safe. So automatically it's not a bad thing. It's just a good thing. It's necessary, totally valuable, right? But at the same time, we can go deep dive into negativity. We can deep dive into being like unproductive and self-sabotaging in that negativity, right? We can become so fearful let's take the stove, for example, right? Like, okay, we could get burned. Our choices are to what? Never use the stove again, to never possibly risk any chance ever of getting burned? Or do we learn the skills to just be careful? Do we learn some skills to use the right equipment and to have self-awareness of our body? And also maybe like, can we think through like, oh, if I got burned on the stove, is it recoverable? Like, can you heal? It's not the end of the story, right? So when we look at the pros and the cons of cooking, we have to eat, we have to take care of ourselves, we have to serve our family. Like, the reality of never using our stove just to avoid getting burned is pretty unrealistic, and it will actually create a whole nother set of problems, right? So we can't avoid a problem. We can't avoid risk entirely. Like, there are situations that we are going to get ourselves into that they're going to come with a risk, or they're at least going to come with some negative consequences or negative possibilities or things that just really are not worth it, right? So it's being able to break things down into those kinds of conversations for ourselves. When we realize, like, what is the battle we're actually fighting? Who are and what are we actually resisting? Then we get to make a choice and say, is that really true? Like, is it realistic to never use the stove again? Because possibly I might get burned. What else could be possible? And at what cost is it going to cost to me and to others, right? So when we think about just the negative bias that we have in our brains, and we realize that it's a real reality. Now, when it comes to relationships and our best friends, that is an amazing blessing that we have with friendships, is that most likely we're the ones that are going to be really negative and hard on ourselves, right? But that best friend, they're so good at coming alongside of us and being able to remind us to overcome those fears, to not give in to those fears or the doubts and the what ifs, right? They're able to see for us. And that's what coaches do too, right? They help us to see, to look up and to look beyond. Give me a reason why I want to push through this uncomfortability to get to the other side, right? So, okay, if we just realize and own, like, okay, negative thoughts are a natural way of life. Sometimes they're really beneficial and I want to use them to my advantage. And other times they're going to take me out of the game. And I want to figure out, when is that happening to me? Is that really what I want to happen? What else could be possible? So as we continue this conversation, to think about being your own cheerleader and the importance of learning how to behave like a best friend to yourself, I want you to realize and take a minute to accept the harsh reality that there is no one in the entire world that can be exactly what you want them to be for you at exactly the right time, every time. Those of you that have a hard time advocating or have a hard time depending on others, I need you to hear this the most, because I think you guys give people a chance to support you in such a small way. You give people so little options. Like, the stakes are so high, aren't they? They have very few opportunities to come alongside you at just the right time in just the right way, because you rarely ever need them, right? So their failure rate is super high, and then you're discouraged, or there's just so much pressure. There's so much significance on their ability to be for you what you want them to be in that moment. And then you mistrust, and then you start that shame and regret and the negative bias cycle all over again, and prove to yourself, see, I can't rely on people. I'm all alone. Okay. That's one aspect. Then there's those of us that ask all the time. We probably ask too much. That would be me, right? Where I'm like, okay, what can happen? Who can help me here? This is something I need. Like, I will give you a million times to show up. But I'm also willing to give lots of people, like, I just need help. So I'm going to go get help from whoever can help me, right? And so it's not as tied to this specific person as much as it is in, like, I need help. Let me just go get help wherever I can get it. Okay. Now, that doesn't stop me from getting stuck in this way, because there are particular people in relationships, I would say right now in my life, those people are still my husband. Like, I do have a high ask rate of my husband, and he's not always available. And depending on how secure I'm feeling in that moment, how loved I'm feeling, how connected we're feeling, I'm going to feel that no a little more personally, or feel like rejection, or be more discouraging than it has to be, right? So even those people that have no problem asking for help, we still struggle. We still have a hard time with it. But if we think about the reality is, and that's where the rub always comes into, where it's really easy when we feel like we're finally willing to ask for help, we're finally willing to put our needs out there, and people don't do it in the way and in the time with the attitude that we desired it to happen, we get so discouraged. And then that's where we start blaming our circumstances. And then we start shaming and blaming ourselves, and shaming and blaming and judging other people. And I tell you what, the unfortunate truth is that when we are just judging other people, when's the last time, let me ask you this. When's the last time you judged somebody else and they like radically changed their behavior and it went really well? Right? Like, nobody's motivated by your judgment. Like, especially when it's these situations where like you road rage, right? That person in the car has no idea how ticked off you are at them. They have moved on from their lives. They are doing their own thing, whatever is happening in their car, whether they're being complete jerks and selfish, or they're having a true emergency. Like, it might be for right reasons or wrong reasons. Either way, you being angry in your car has no impact on their behavior. And it's in that realm, right? Like, when we fear and figure out, like, how do we stop being so judgmental and critical of others, it frees them up, and it frees me up from just being upset and being angry. But the real conversation we're trying to get to today is like, how do you free yourself up? Because you are the only one that suffers when you're judging and shaming and putting yourself down. It does not motivate you to become a better person, right? It's not getting you to go do and start accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish. I mean, it might sometimes, but at the root, is that really the way you want to be motivated, is by beating yourself up every time? Like, that's why we go to our best friend, because our best friend doesn't treat us that way. Okay. So how can we treat ourselves like a best friend then? How can we come alongside and cheerlead ourselves on? So something I say around here a lot too, that will hopefully sound familiar, is if you're new here, here's a new thought for you, is that I want us to start viewing other people's acceptance, their encouragement, their support as icing on the cake. And I think that's really gets to the heart of even this conversation today, is like, you're the cake. You are the only one that can't get away from you. You are your own best friend. You are your best cheerleader. Well, and that's the question to ask yourself. Are you a good cheerleader for yourself, or are you your biggest enemy? And knowing that we can't always depend on other people to be the cheerleader we think we need them to be in the time that we want them to be there, right? And I think that's in that space where you can start recognizing and giving other people in your life the freedom that they're having their own lives. They have their own upsets. They have their own weaknesses. You know, I think something that I probably comes up most with my marriage is we are so the opposite in like every way. The way that we want to problem solve, the way we want to talk about the problem, and the kind of support we want from one another, completely opposite. And we have to work really hard to speak each other's language, right? To come alongside of each other, and also to not react to the way that they respond to us, and take it when they're meaning it to be support and we hear it as sabotage. There's another truth in there, right? Like, we can't just be accusing of actions and feelings and thoughts based on our own experiences. We have to leave room to accept other people for who they are and who they aren't, for what their intentions are, for what they're capable of doing in that moment, right? We can't ask things of people that they're not actually able to do for you, especially if they aren't even able to do it for themselves, right? So having cheerleaders in our lives is fantastic. Totally icing on the cake. We want them as much as possible. Like, who wouldn't want to have people coming alongside you to encourage you, to support you? Like, it feels good. It's totally awesome. But what are you going to do when it's just you all by yourself? Or they're not available in that moment, or they're so down and discouraged. Maybe they did lose faith in you. Maybe they don't actually really support your dreams. Maybe they don't want you to be doing the thing that you're doing. Something that my son has been saying to me this last year, I don't take it too seriously. It's a little bit frustrating, but you're also like, okay, let's have realistic expectations and knowing who you are, right? But more often than not, he's like, why are you doing this? I can't even say, he doesn't say it a ton. So it's, in my more often than not comment. He's also not like my biggest cheerleader. So I'm not expecting him to be my cheerleader, to be like, Mom, keep going in your business, keep being a coach, keep growing. He's consumed with his own world. He's not really there. But every once in a while, he's like, why are you doing that? Can you just stop doing it? But what I recognize in that moment, he's generally saying that because he's lacking quality time with me. Like, it really actually is more about him than it is about me. He doesn't actually want me to stop doing what I'm doing. He doesn't care. Like, really, that's really what it boils down to. He really doesn't care. It's not really impacting him. But if it is impacting him in a negative way and he feels like it's a threat, or he feels like it's something that's stopping from him getting his needs met, or something that he wants in this immediate moment, then yeah, he's going to be like, can you stop doing that so that I can get this, right? Leave room for that possibility. What am I going to do? Am I going to be putting my life in my 10-year-old's hands to tell me to move forward or to stop? Like, who has your life in their hands in your world? Do you want that to be completely up to them, or do you want to take some of that say back? And I think it's in that space that we've got to be really comfortable. Like, maybe there's a reason you haven't been doing that, because you're uncomfortable just being with you. When's the last time you just sat quietly by yourself? You didn't have to go run to food. You didn't have to put the TV on in the background, or put some music on, or go out in public, or be social, or even just go to sleep, right? Like, can you be comfortable just being with you? Do you like yourself? Do you listen to yourself? Do you value the things? Like, are you able to say anything nice to yourself or about yourself? Do you believe in you? This is your biggest superpower. To be and figure out how to be secure and to accept yourself for who you are and who you aren't. Because it's in that space that other people's acceptance and their non-acceptance, right? Their rejection, it might feel like rejection, or maybe it's just not even, it doesn't even have to be that intense as rejection. Maybe it's just doubt, their own fears, their own insecurities, their own wrestlings, right? Are you allowing that to take you out of the game and to tear you down? So it's this challenge between, you got to be the cake for your life. You have the biggest say in what you're going to do about it, and what you are capable of doing, and what you believe about yourself. You believe the strongest. And so I want you to think in this moment, like, how have you been using the people in your life, your best friends, or maybe who feels like your biggest enemy right now? Did they have too much say? Are you actually just using them as a scapegoat right now so that you don't have to have your own value in yourself? Or maybe you do feel so negative and you're full of so much doubt that you're just grasping for somebody else to believe in you. And so I want you to hear that the problem is not wanting other people's acceptance or the belief in you. The problem is your own belief and acceptance of you. And that is the very foundational place to start. Can you build yourself up? Can you follow through on things you say you're going to do for you? Can you be your biggest advocate? Can you be your biggest cheerleader in the face of other people's negativity or fears or doubts or naysaying or their false accusations? Or they might be true accusations, right? Like if you have a people in your life that are like rubbing your nose in your failures or keep telling you like you're never going to make it, I don't want that for you. And it doesn't mean keep those people around. It doesn't mean give them tons of airtime in your brain and in your heart and in your thoughts. But I want you to really believe that they're not the definer of whether you can or cannot do something. And so it comes back to you in the quiet places, in your own dreams, your desires for what kind of future do you want to have? You have a say in the matter. You are your biggest advocate. So what kind of little steps do you need to take? Can you take to start leaning into that? Right? I think about even in just the little steps. One of the things that I've talked about in the past is like, even if you can't start like talking about yourself in a positive way, could you at least stop tearing yourself down? How about stop pointing out every time you've made a mistake to strangers or to the people closest to you? Or next time you sit down, like it's a challenging spot between this like false humility where we don't want to sound proud and arrogant by speaking highly of ourselves. But it doesn't make us more humble by just tearing ourselves down. We're just as focused on ourselves, right? So whether you think too highly of yourself or you think too lowly, it's still all about you in a prideful way. As opposed to think about the space that a best friend does hold. They're not being prideful or arrogant when they believe in you, when they think that when they can point out the good things in you, when they can cheer you on, when they're willing to give you another chance, when they're reminding you like it's not over, when they have fun with you, when you guys can just laugh and have jokes and play together, right? Like you want to spend time together. How can you start nurturing that kind of a relationship with yourself? As opposed to tearing yourself down, I want to get away from myself, I can't be with myself. Where is this safe, honest, humble security? That's where we're trying to go. So most importantly, I think if this is resonating with you and you're like, yeah, I've never done this before, this is a brand new thought, freaking out, right? Keep it simple, keep it small. The first step is always just getting curious and gain awareness. You don't need to start teaching other people. You don't need them to change so you can change. Like keep it in your heart, in your mind, and in your thoughts. Just start to recognize, boy, what am I telling myself today when I didn't follow through on the things I said I wanted to do, right? And these are basic things like maybe personal hygiene or your own health or reading a book you wanted to do or to go after, you wanted to pray more or you wanted to take care of your house more, you wanted to become a better parent. I like there's all kinds of grandiose ideas that come into our brain where we're like, oh, I would love to go do this, right? If you don't do it right away, how do you talk to yourself about it? How do you frame it to yourself and frame it out loud to other people? And if you're not sure, then just start getting curious. Maybe even ask your friend, ask your families, like, wait, how do I usually talk about myself? Do I tear myself down a lot? Do you feel like I'm really hard on myself? Where can I grow? How can I just get better? And get honest with yourself about what are you really honestly afraid of? Because I think sometimes we feel like if we were to do this, then it means that, right? And I think we get really tripped up when it's things like forgiveness, right? It's easy for us to feel like, well, if I forgive you, that I'm telling you it's okay, that I'm accepting that you hurt me and I'm giving you permission to hurt me again, right? And that gets so messy, and that's not really what forgiveness is, right? That's not really what's happening. And so maybe you need to redefine your terms. Redefine, like, what do I think humility looks like? What do I think pride looks like? What am I thinking self-independence looks like, right? Like, what am I making depending on other people look like? What would it mean to speak kindly to myself? I saw a post from a friend the other day, and she was spending time with her grandmother, and she felt like her grandma was being really negative, just in general, right? Like, she's just really hard on herself. And so she brought it up to her, and she was like, why do you talk so harshly to yourself? And her response was, oh, I do it on purpose. Like, it's my motivator, right? Like, if I don't, then I'm going to slack and I'm going to just not do anything. Right. And you're kind of like, oh, well, I mean, it's just a harsh motivator, right? Like, let me beat myself into submission. Like, let me not let me keep growing, right? Like, there's an aspect of it where you're like, okay, she accomplished a lot of really great things in life, right? Like, it brought her a lot of great fruit that she wanted. But is there something in the middle that's like, why are we talking to ourselves the way that we're talking? Did somebody teach us to talk to ourselves that way? Are there people in our lives that's how they talk, and so that's just how we talk too? Maybe it is our best friend. Maybe we've taken on somebody else's motivation tactic. Is it serving you well? Is it how you want to speak to yourself? Keep breaking those things down to what are you actually upset about, and figure out what is actually really honest and loving to myself. I think a great tool as well is to start listening to how you speak to your best friend. How do you speak to other people? Right? Like, we've heard that before. That's not a new thought, right? Like, we would never speak to other people the way that we speak to ourselves. So if you're not sure how far gone you are in this negative self-talk, like, are you your worst enemy to a best friend perspective? Like, if that's a scale, where are you on that scale? How do you show up then? How are you speaking to other people? And compare that with how you speak to yourself. I think that's a great place to start, to just start getting curious and observing and breaking it down. When I think about a friend, so they see you, they listen to you, they acknowledge you, they like you. I think something that I have actually said to a few people, where I felt this way probably more so in my marriage at times, where I'm like, okay, yeah, I believe you love me, but do you like me? Did you ever see, I think it was How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I love movies. We're a big quoting movie family. And she's like, I love you, Benny, but I don't really like you right now. Right? So it's in that space, like, your best friend actually likes you, and it feels good to be liked, right? So maybe ask yourself that, like, okay, maybe you love yourself. Like, maybe you don't completely destroy and sabotage yourself. There's things that you do, like there's self-care, and you find value in your life, big picture. But do you like yourself? Do you listen to yourself? Do you see yourself? Or do we just not show up at all? I think the other important aspect that a friend does for us and we would do for them, if you had a coffee date with them or you scheduled some quality time, do you just not show up? Do you just not even call? Do you just forget about it and not even put it on the calendar? Like, if a friend did that to you, you'd probably start to question, and maybe especially if they did it more than once, you would really start to question, like, I'm not sure that we're actually friends. Like, I don't think you actually want to spend time with me. I can't rely on you. I don't trust you. And so, again, back to my comment earlier, I want you to consider the possibility, if you have a really hard time doing that, and you have a hard time sharing your heart and your life with others and getting your needs met and being vulnerable, does your one friend only have one shot in the entire year to show up at that coffee date, or else? Like, it doesn't leave any room for a last minute emergency, a last minute something happening in their world, right? Like, there's no grace, there's no room for it. So again, side note, it's so valuable when we don't hold the other people in our lives to such an impossible standard. But consider, are you doing that to yourself? Are you holding yourself to that kind of standard? Do you keep your dates? And that's one thing that it's so hard for me to do. Like when I say that I'm going to do something that is beneficial, to follow through. And that's a great space to start looking. If you feel like you're not good at showing up for yourself and you don't follow through, you easily skip those coffee dates, you easily skip those workouts, or having the quality time that you needed to take care of yourself, to take a break, to rest. Why? And then how do you speak to yourself when it's over on the other side? Start to listen to how you're speaking to yourself and take it through the filter. Would you say it to your friend? Put your friend's face on your face, right? Like imagine speaking to yourself the way you would speak to your best friend, or how your best friend speaks to you. How can you start to baby step and move your way through to start just moving towards that direction? I think something that is also really helpful and can be inspiring, because we get really stuck in the trenches and it's really hard to see the growth when we're day in and day out. So it is October still here when I'm recording this. I want you to think about, what was your life like October 2023, a year ago? What was life like for you? What were you stressed about? Was there something big that was happening? How are you speaking to other people? Like, what's different about your life today than it was last year? And I just want you to consider, like, is it better? Is it the same? Is it worse? And why? I think for me, like, man, it has been a really hard year. That when I look back to this October from last October, like, I can see, like, oh my gosh, so much gratitude. I can see so much fruit of, like, okay, when I think of the whole year, it feels really negative and hard and exhausting, and I don't love it. But when I break it down to exactly like October to October, I've grown a lot. I am much more clear on where I'm going, what I'm doing. I don't feel as confused. I'm not as hurt. I'm not as stressed. I'm not as, right? Like, I remember distinctly in that moment, like, I've come so far. And I want you to put yourself, as we're winding down this year, this is a really typical time of year for people to start taking stock of how this last year went. How do we want to intentionally finish this year? And how do we want to intentionally start next year? If you want coaching, please join my coaching program. I have a Thrive Through the Holidays specific 6-week series happening right now. Go check it out. We can work specifically on these issues to get you through so you can thrive through these really challenging times that we're about to enter or you've already entered. But I want you to think about, who do you want to become? Where do you want to go? What is one thing that you would want to move towards so that you can see where there's growth? And it's not this radical. It's not like the diet culture where you're like, okay, let me just radically change tomorrow, but then you're going to go back to your old ways and be completely, backslide the rest of the year. This isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. It's a journey. It's the rest of your life. We're always moving forward or taking a step back. We're not perfect. Our friends aren't perfect. Just like nobody else in the entire world can be just what you need them to be at just the right time, nor can you do that for yourself. There has to be room and grace and patience with yourself, just like you would want to offer to your best friend. You're not always going to be able to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. But what's the majority, right? What's the goal? Like, what do you do after you have spoken that way? I think about the relationships where hard things have been said, or maybe you had a fight with your best friend or your spouse or your family, and there has been a positive repair, right? Didn't you offer grace to them and forgiveness? And forgiveness, you had to figure out how to have forgiveness for yourself. Those are still really important conversations that you have to be able to have all by yourself, for yourself, with yourself. You are the only one that can never leave your side. And I think if you want, there's definitely a huge conversation to have about the role that God plays in that. And I want you to know that even though we're not talking about it right now, I don't want to trip you up. I don't want you to put God in a box. And I don't want you to keep him out if he's not been a part of the equation before either. I don't want you to just shut down because there's a wall there. But maybe it's time to start addressing, like, what are the walls that are in my way of being able to like myself and speak kindly to myself? Why haven't I been a good best friend to myself? Are you willing to learn how to? How can you feel secure and honest by being your best friend, being your biggest cheerleader? Because at the end of the day, you've only got you. What are you going to do in the face of adversity? And I think that's the greatest space to be in when we're not victims. I'm not just here to make you happy. I'm not just here to please you. I'm not just here to fulfill your dreams and your goals in your life. I can't have goals because there's somebody else's goals and dreams for me. That is where we fall short and we get resentful and bitter and easily discouraged, and then we feel like a victim. How secure are you in dreaming for you, in loving you, and then letting the other people in your life be icing on the cake? Let them come alongside of you on the journey to cheer you up, to teach you, to speak to you kindly. You practice speaking kindly to other people all the time. So how can you start to be that same kind of cheerleader for yourself that you really do? Ultimately, that would be good, wouldn't it? If you can't leave yourself, like if you have to be with yourself 24/7, you have a choice. You can be your biggest enemy or your biggest cheerleader. So which one are you going to be? Thank you for joining me today. I hope that brought you a lot of encouragement and some information to be able to apply to your own life and to start taking down those walls that are in your way. What is that one thing that you want to take on and take with you today? I would love to hear from you and to hear about it. Follow me here on the podcast so that you're alerted and don't miss any upcoming episodes. You can find me on Instagram or even on my website at beyondthewallspodcast.com. If you want more help, I offer one-on-one coaching and would love to connect with you. Until next time, have a great day.